Hello everybody, welcome along to this video. This is Mr. Johnson Teaches Language Methods, part of my language revision series of videos, just going over some of the core things that you will need to know when it comes up to your GCSE English language. And what you need to do really is be ready to pause this video and make notes, as it says at the bottom of the screen there, because whilst I'm going to talk you through things and you're hopefully going to sit there and listen to those things, just sitting listening won't have any real effect long term. You need to have some notes that you can look back on, and by writing things down you're more likely to commit them to your memory and remember them rather than just sitting there and listening. So after each one of the things I go through, please make sure you pause the video and we'll go on from there then. So first up, when you're writing about methods, or sometimes you hear them called features, or devices even, as I've put my first bullet point, you do need to be able to identify the methods a writer uses. So when you're giving a piece of text in class, or ultimately when you're sat in the GCSE exams and given a piece of text, you are expected to be able to spot some of the things that the writers have used. For example, personification, simile, like I'm about to go through. But the second bullet point is also important. Never just feature spot, which is what it's called, where you literally just identify methods like going, that is alliteration, that is sibilance. Always remember to explain the effect that a method has on the person reading it. That is where you gain the marks. Identifying the feature is important, but the thing which really is important is explaining the effect that feature has. And I've done that at the bottom for you. The writer has personified the city, which makes the tone darker because it feels like a threat to the main character. The first thing is identifying the method. The writer has personified the city, which makes the tone. That bit is where I'm explaining the method. So be ready then to write some of these down. This is hopefully revision. Some of these you will recognise. There might be a couple in there you've not heard before. All depends what you've been taught in your classes. But let's go for it. And they look like this. So first up then, in alphabetical order, these are as well. Alliteration. So remember, the alliteration is the repetition of sounds at the start of a series of words. And the key thing there is it's sounds. It's not the letters. So in the example I put down there are the letters there, but it's more about the sounds, where you hear I have been beaten, bullied and brutally broken. Alliteration would be an example if I had a sentence with lots of F's and PH words in it, like phone, for example. That phone and the word, let's say, free and phone is alliteration. Even though it's different letters, it's about the sounds. So alliteration is the repetition of sounds at the start of a series of words. Moving on. You've then got assonance. A similar idea is the repetition of vowel sounds inside the words. So vowels A, E, I, O, U. Like the example I've got there, the moon looks like a blue balloon. Notice, as I mentioned with alliteration, that it's not the same letters, but it's the same sounds that they make. And notice that with assonance, it's within the words. I've always found assonance a harder one to spot, not something you frequently get, but it can definitely be there, and it's certainly one that is not spotted by many students. So if you're able to spot deliberate use of assonance by a writer and explain the effect, then you'll certainly be doing better than a lot of students. Moving forwards, we've then got imagery. It's a very broad one, imagery, so you need to be careful to say what sort of imagery, but it's language chosen deliberately to create a strong or vivid picture, like a picture in the reader's mind. Not everything that you say creates imagery. When you're trying to be deliberately descriptive, that is imagery. And like I said, you need to say what sort of imagery it is. Like at the bottom there, is it dark imagery, imagery of death, positive imagery, warm imagery, imagery linked to war zones? It could be so detailed, but it's up to you to make sure you name what sort of imagery is the writer using. Moving on. There's juxtaposition then. Now quite simply, it's two opposites placed together which show their difference. I remember famously I taught one of my classes a few years ago, and I took the tallest student and the shortest student and I stood them next to each other, and what I was doing there was drawing attention to how different their height was. It can be things to do with colour, it can be a whole range of things, maybe rich and poor, if a writer is trying to really draw attention to how rich the rich are and how poor the poor were. Charles Dickens does that a lot in his work. That's juxtaposition, opposites being placed together. Then there's metaphor, one hopefully you remember from primary school. It's where one thing is described as another, and by doing that you're making a comparison between the two things. For example, the sky is a sea of diamonds. I'm then creating this comparison between the sky and the sea and how rich the stars in the sky look like diamonds. So it's a metaphor being that comparison. An extended metaphor is where you continue that comparison multiple times across, I've put there the poem, but also it can be any text. So I put examples there, the sky is a sea of diamonds, and then imagine a few sentences later I talked about its twinkling ceiling, and then I talked about precious jewels looking down from above. I'm continuing this idea about the sky being the sea of diamonds and being precious throughout the text, so I'm extending it. Quite simply a metaphor which is extended and made longer. This one hopefully you might have heard of, may not. Lexical set, sometimes it's called a semantic field. What is that? Well, as I've put there in the middle, a set of words used in and throughout a text that are related. So words which almost are on a theme, if you like. For example, I put two examples down at the bottom there. If I had the words battalion, missile, attack come up in a paragraph or in a text, I've got then a lexical set of war, or a semantic field of war. As I say, either phrase that you use there means the same thing ultimately. Sunrise, glowing, beaming. If I was experiencing those words, I've got a lexical set, a semantic field of light going on there. So it's like pattern spotting patterns of words which are grouped in a theme. Onomatopoeia, an old favourite, often first taught at primary school, words which imitate and copy the sounds that they are describing. For example, the word zip sounds like the noise that a zip makes. It's onomatopoeic. Boom, whoosh, hiss. And there's multiple more of those as well. So there it is, onomatopoeia, one that's possibly more tricky to spell. An oxymoron, where you place two opposites directly together, creating contradiction. So I'm talking here about opposite words. Unlike juxtaposition, where the ideas can be close to one another, oxymoron really is very opposite words, completely opposite words placed together, like a brilliant war. How can war be a brilliant thing when it's so violent? Or exploding comfortably. How can something so violent as exploding be comfortable? It seems to contradict itself. So that is what an oxymoron is, where you're placing those together to try and achieve an effect. Personification. I always try and remind my classes that it's got the word person in it. So it's when you give a non-human object human qualities to personify it. And I put there the door screamed on its hinges as the wind battered the house. Doors can't scream, that's a human thing. And battering is again a human action, but you're applying it to something which isn't human, almost bringing it to life. Plosives, hard consonant sounds in words. So I put those down there. This is like the T in take, the P in power, and I won't read through the whole list there, you can see them yourself. But plosive is almost like an explosive sort of release of air from your mouth between your lips, and that's what plosives are. And as they're hard sounds, they often can accompany or achieve a bit of a violent or strong effect in the words that are being used. So those are plosives. Repetition as well, deliberately using the same image or word or phrase or even idea more than once. The sky of diamonds, the sky of beauty and wonder. I'm repeating the sky there in order to try and draw your attention to it. So repetition, one that's very easy to spot in most cases, and also one that's really straightforward to use in your own writing as well. I strongly encourage students to use that when they're writing. Then you've got sibilance. So we had plosives earlier, the very strong sounds. Sibilance here, the repetition of soft sounds in a number of words like s and ch and z. Those are very delicate sounds. And my example there, the soft setting sun slid beneath the sea's waves. Sibilance can be used for a range of effects. Generally, it often achieves a very calming tone or mood in the piece of writing, although sometimes you'll see writers using it for the directly opposite thing, creating a calm effect in a very violent or action-packed piece, almost trying to create juxtaposition, but I won't complicate it too much. At its most simple level, sibilance is that repetition of soft sounds. And then we've got a simile as well, comparing two things. Like we had metaphor earlier, comparing things, but in this case, similes use the word like or as, and I've got some examples there for you. Ready to explode like a volcano, left the room as though she was being chased by wolves, they were as fast as a speeding bullet. Generally very easy to spot similes. Consider why the writer might have chosen my top one there, exploding like a volcano. That simile has very violent connotations, makes it seem very dangerous, so always be ready to talk about the effect of it. And that is the end of my my little run through. There are others out there as well that your teachers may teach you. Anaphora being another good example of repetition, for example. There are many more, but at a basic level, those are some of the language features that you might be able to spot when it comes to analysing a piece of text for language. And that's the end of this video. Remember that you will be expected to analyse language on both your language papers at GCSE. It's question 2 on language paper 1 and it's question 3 on language paper 2. Go off and do some extra research, go back over those, create yourself some flashcards to remember it. By watching this video, you've made the first step towards good revision. Do check out some of my other videos on the channel as well, both in this playlist and in other playlists which will support you with your English. And I say thanks for watching this video to the very end, and goodbye.